Okay, thank you, Andrea. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Teresa Lynn. I'm a research fellow at the ADAPT Centre in Dublin City University in Ireland. The ADAPT Centre is a research centre that's funded by Science Foundation Ireland, and it's actually a result of a lot of hard work that Joseph put in a former life in Ireland. We've a large MT group there, and we also have a growing language technology, Irish language technology group there. So I'm going to talk today, and Andrea has hinted on it, I'm going to talk about a project where we've been involved with one of the Irish government departments in developing an MT system to help their in-house translators. So the overview of the talk, I'll give a background first up on the Irish language to put it in context and to explain why we do have translation needs as such in Ireland. And I'll talk about the specific translation needs within this Irish government department. And then I'll touch on the actual pilot study that we did and keep it hopefully high level. But at the end, feel free to ask any questions that might be relevant. And then also I'll talk about future plans for shared translation services within the Irish government departments. So firstly, background for those who aren't familiar with Ireland or the Irish language. It's our national language. It's a first official language. English is the second official language, and it's an official EU language. Now, even though it is the first official language, most people will know that most of us speak English. And according to the last census, which is based on a population of 4.7 million, the daily usage is 73,000 people who would use it outside of the education system. So in Ireland, it's a compulsory subject, and on the census is a question, do you use Irish outside the education system, to really gauge who uses it on a daily basis. However, 1.7 million profess to have an ability to speak the language. So historically, and I don't want to have a history lesson here, but it's important for us to understand why we have such a need and where the relationship between English and Irish comes in. Historically, it was the most widely spoken language. Due to historical factors, which we won't go into, it led to decline in its use and also an increase in the use of English. If we go back to the map, it's still spoken natively by people in the Gaeltacht regions. So the Gaeltacht regions are designated preserved regions, and on this map you'll see it's the dark colours, mostly in the west of Ireland. You'll notice that I include the north of Ireland. It's also a minority language, and Northern Ireland, as you know, is part of the UK, but Irish is a minority language in the north of Ireland, and as part of our remit for the ELRC, we're covering the entire island of Ireland for Irish data collection. However, given that dismal type picture for Irish in history, there is an urban revival seen recently, and there's been an increase in the emergence of Irish medium schools across the country. And also we've observed an increase in online usage across all demographics. So in our constitution, so since we became a republic, Irish has been, some measures have been taken to protect the Irish language. And it's a mandatory subject, like I said, in education. It's also a requirement for teaching at primary level, for working in the civil service, for the police and practicing law and so on. From a legislative point of view, 1973, Ireland joined the EEC. It was a treaty language. 1999, the British-Irish Agreement Act recognised it as part of the cultural wealth of the island of Ireland. In 2003, in the Republic of Ireland, we have an Official Languages Act, which saw the introduction of a language commissioner. So the language commissioner monitors and enforces compliance by public bodies. So the Irish language, public bodies need to be able to provide their services to anyone who wants it through their own language. That's a constitutional right for any Irish person. 2007, it became an official working language of the EU. Now, there is a partial derogation in place, whereby only key legislation is translated, and this is based on the lack of resources, human resources available at the time. But this derogation is due to be lifted in 2021. 2012, we have a Gaeltacht Act, and basically this gave statutory effect to a 20-year strategy for the Irish language. And from that, as a group of us working on a national digital strategy for Irish, which is due to be launched by the end of the year. So the department which I'm talking about is the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht. So this department oversees the protection and preservation of Ireland's culture and heritage, and also in which the Irish language belongs. It advances the use of the Irish language, and we have a dedicated minister with responsibility for Gaeltacht affairs. So within the DCHG, from now on I'll either refer to it as the department or DCHG, all work within this Gaeltacht provision of the department is carried out through Irish. So all internal memos, email correspondence, reports, notices and so on. While every other department should outsource their translations, often they come to the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht for their translations or for advice, or it's basically the first port of call for Irish language matters. Now, some of those translations may be taken on by the in-house translation team, but then they'll also be outsourced. However, and this is no criticism of the department, there is at the moment no central system and no framework in place to make this a seamless process. And just as a note, the actual translation that is carried out for the Irish Parliament is carried out by a separate translation group. Okay, so the translation practices at the department, when we first spoke to them, all content is fully human translated, and this is a must. And this is something that we reiterate when we're talking about machine translation. Even if you are to use technology, we always need to have the human in the loop if we're working on public administration data. And they did use a Trados, a CAT tool Trados, but it had no terminology management, didn't share any term bases or so on, and definitely no machine translation. But as with any public administration, there's a lot of repetitive translation tasks. So we had some initial meetings with the senior staff at the department, and actually this is driven by the output of the MetaNet white paper series that a lot of people might be familiar with here, which highlighted the need, the lack of resources and the need for technology, including machine translation for the Irish language. So the department recognised the potential for investing in language technology, specifically machine translation. Now, we did highlight a broad spectrum of issues where we were lacking, but as this is a new area for them, to get immediate cost savings, this they could bring to the minister and then move from there. So this is why we honed in on this rather than, say, developing computer-aided language learning systems for schools. And then also, as you could see, this cost savings was clearly apparent. So the look that we had, we were fortunate enough, so the synergy between the two groups, the goals of the department basically were to increase the translator's workload. So that they wanted to demonstrate cost savings and productivity, which would justify then working with machine translation and then create a business case to move forward and expand. And also they needed to become up to date with best practices in translation. The goals for the Adapt Centre was to provide our team with a research opportunity to actually work on English-Irish data, because it's not so widely available, as Kenneth alluded to there earlier. And for us to create more digital content for the general public and for future research. And then also for the public outreach. As part of the Irish Language Technology Group, we try not to do research for research's sake. We want to have some sort of societal impact, something tangible at the end. So the translators in the department, and we needed to introduce them to the concept of machine translation. Now, we were lucky, we do have open-minded translators here, and we're very fortunate. Shanna's on the panel up next, and we're very fortunate to have worked with her with this. But there was no in-house knowledge or experience of working with machine translation. So free online service is obviously not an option for multiple reasons. Obviously, we don't want, the government department doesn't want to send their translations across Google server, and they want to keep the data in-house. Also, there's poor quality, and there's a negative public perception of machine translation in Ireland, and this is due to misuse and abuse of Google Translate. So, for example, and this is widely seen and is often seen on social media as an attack against Irish language, but say, for example, the first one here, they should be like a room to change your baby, but actually means to exchange your baby. A room where you exchange your baby, change it over for another one. And then Iarn Road Éireann, which is the Irish rail system, this does not say welcome to Euston Station, it says to welcome Euston Station. So it's like we're welcoming Euston Station in. So this is the perception of machine translation in Ireland, and while people can be dubious, we were lucky that the translation team were quite open-minded. So at the beginning, so the project scope that we defined with the government was a pilot study, short term of 6 months. We didn't promise the world, but we said we will try this out based on previous work, previous research in other languages that looked like we should be able to help them. So we needed to establish the viability of developing the MT engine for them and then test the integration into translation workflows. Now, we didn't actually engineer a new translation system. We're using the Moses system, where we are basically just feeding it with collected data and tuning the parameters to suit the Irish language. So, just a quick overview of the steps taken to actually develop this MT system. We established the use case. So the translators had a variety of tasks to do, but we tried to group some of the text and the type of text together, the genre or the domain, the style, so that we could have a system that would be tailored exactly to their needs. So we elected to group notices, public relations, parliamentary questions, reports and speeches, as these often tend to be quite similar. We combined existing resources into a baseline system, so Kenneth talked about a base system earlier on, and actually that was data that was just found online. It was crawled, it wasn't clean, it was noisy, as he said before. No huge effort was put into alignment or clearing out noise, but it was just to establish a base system on what was available publicly. We did some experiments with that, we got some poor results, and then moved on to try to tune it to the system, to the needs of the translation department. So we gathered all their previously translated data in TMX format, aligned, cleaned, and then retrained the system. Found a significant improvement when we came to automated testing, and then further crawl for more public information sources online. And at that stage, at the end of the 6-month study, it outperformed the free online services. So for anyone who does care about the blue score, and I won't go into it too much, but it's an overview of how easy it was for us to actually gain the significance in score improvement. So that first line there, CCGB, is the online crawl data that was noisy. And we only had 6,000 sentences, so the blue score was 11 points. When we got the data from the department and they handed over all the previous translations in TMX format, we retrained the system, figured out what the best n-gram was, a couple of parameter tuning, and we achieved a blue score of 30. Now, studies have been done in the past in various languages, not on Irish yet, but it's said that 45, for example, is a good blue score for Spanish in terms of post-editing. So if you've got a 45 blue score, then it's a good standard for post-editing. So the current model that we have, and so this is a year and a half on from the end of the 6-month study, we've over 108,000 sentences collected, and our blue score is 46. And this is just a short graph from back at the pilot study. Now, we haven't been monitoring the usage since because there's a different angle on the research at the moment, but the words translated per month over the first 5 months, and we can see basically this is an uptake by the translators in the use of the MT engine, so they didn't have to use it. So you can see that there's a steady increase of the number of words that went through the MT system. There's a dip there in July, and that's when the politicians were on holiday. So, and then up again in August. This is a screenshot for anyone who can't visualize how this MT system would be integrated into the translator's workflow. So you might be familiar with this is the Trados workbench. So what we have down here at the bottom is the document is on the left, and it's broken into segments, which are paragraphs. And the translator is currently working on the second one, which is highlighted in blue. On the top, you'll see two sections. On the right-hand side, there's a yellow box. It says 71%, I think. That's the translation memory. So it's indicating a fuzzy match of 71%. So it's saying, I've seen a sentence like this before. We've translated something similar. It's not 100%, but it's 71%. You can choose to edit me, or we also have the machine translated output, and you can choose to edit me. So the translator has the choice between the two. We are trying to collect metrics at the moment on when the translator chooses one or the other. Anecdotally, Shanna will say she usually prefers the machine translated output, but we don't, as scientists, we can't report on anecdote. So this is how it is. So the idea is that it's seamless. It doesn't interfere with the translator's workflow, and it just carries on with improving their efficiency. So the success factors of this project we would put down to, there's a number of reasons for this. So basically the openness from the beginning. So the honesty between the ADAPT Centre and the government department. So we didn't promise the sun, moon and stars. We said we think we could do this based on other work that's been done for other languages, and we'd like to try it out. We had to manage the expectations. We obviously exceeded expectations, but we ourselves didn't know until we got the data and the use case. There was clear communication at all levels, so that meant that we weren't just dealing with management level, but we actually worked with the translators on a regular basis. And we kept this dialogue open from the start. So the translators, if you keep in mind, they know their job best. Not necessarily the management level. The translator know their job best. They know what they need. They understand their data. They're the ones that you need to engage with to make sure they share the data and that they're giving you the data that is best for your system. And then also we facilitate the easy transition into the new process. Now, as we can see, it was integrated more or less seamlessly, but it is an adjustment for translators to transition into this new way. So we provided technical support, guidance, be it in person, on the phone, or an email. And then we helped provide an economic argument then in favour of machine translation and in favour of sharing data, which then helped the ELRC project when that came down the line. What we'd point out is here that we seized on small opportunities. So this started from an initial meeting, a very small informal meeting, a small budget, and only a couple of people to work on this. We insisted on not using jargon, and being too technical with our explanations and discussions, and using more accessible language. And what's crucial is the ability to provide statistics on the MT uptake. So that last graph there with the uptake with the translators, that actually had a huge impact and has had policy impact in Ireland. So from which we all know, but there was no harm in repeating here, the importance of data sharing. So if you start off, you share data, help to develop or improve machine translation. That leads to greater productivity. It leads to reduced translation costs. It increases bilingual content, which then becomes shareable data, which then improves machine translation, and so on. So future plans for the Irish government, out of this and out of the success of our pilot study, the plan is to have a shared translation service. So rather than every government department taking it upon themselves to go out to tender or to try to find somewhere to outsource translations or to send it in to Shanna's team, to have a centralised service. So the establishment of the shared translation service that will operate within the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht. It will serve all departments. It's going to create 5 jobs initially, and initially we'll look at the Irish-English language pair, but then we'll scale to other languages for other departments which deal with other European languages. And in terms of how we are now helping to impact government policy, this was a DCHG report to the government on the shared translation service. Central to the successful implementation of this plan and to the achievement of value for money and economies of scale is the development of an effective machine translation. And so we're very grateful and thankful that the Irish government have now been able to see the benefits of this and going forward will embrace machine translation. And of course, this is how it'll fit into the overall plan. So following on maybe a year and a half after the pilot study, the ELRC programme came on board, and it all fed in quite nicely because we had established a nice relationship already and a good trust base with the Department of the Gaeltacht. So we had the beginnings of the network for Irish public administration. We were able to provide an exemplary user test case, and that's important then when we go out to other potential data holders that we can use this MT system as an example. We've established a positive reputation nationally, and also this enables further data collection within that department, within other government departments and smaller county councils and universities and so on. And we're now part of one of the new CEF programs, so the ELRI, where we will be expanding to focus on some concerns that have arisen through sharing our data. And this might be a case for a lot of countries where people might be afraid to hand it over to the European Commission, but happy to hand it to the national level. And so the idea is that we're going to, and Thierry was here yesterday with a stand, there should probably be some brochures still around today. The idea is that if there's concern about handing to the European Commission and there's questions about maybe the legal issues or the format of the data, the quality of the data, if they're happy to hand it to the national level, we're proposing to have national public relay stations where we can have this intermediate stage before we hand it over to the ELRC. This may not be an issue for every country, but particularly in Portugal and Ireland, it became evident that this was going to be an issue going forward. Agus Sinead, gur maithagh.
Hi.
Hi, Marcus.
Yeah, I'm from DGT at the European Commission. I'm just a little bit curious about the way the translators used the translations, because what we found in the Commission, which was new to me, relatively new to me recently, is that yes, many of them who use it the way you described, taking the whole segment, but there's probably about half of them who don't like to do that at all, and what they like to do is incorporate it in the auto-suggest and just get little chunks. I don't know if you saw that or if it's a new idea or...
Yeah, I've seen it just at talks or at conferences. We haven't gone down that road yet because still we have limited budget and we have one PhD student working on this. It could be something we talk to Shanna about and see if she might want to try something out. But yeah, there are different ways in which translators would like to use a system like that. But for the moment, it's post-editing the entire sentence as you would with a fuzzy match.
Maybe just a short question. How much more data do you think there is that is useful to you and specific to the task? Do you have any ideas on that already?
So in domain data, not so much. We really have everything. We get every 6 months or so, we get another batch of data from Shanna. Across the country, there is a lot. It's as we continue to delve a little bit deeper, and we had our workshop, our ELRC workshop last month, and suddenly we found a few more coming out of the woodwork. Said we have this, we have that. It's very hard at this stage to say. It could be just this tip of the iceberg. There could be more underneath. Online, we have found a lot more, and we're improving our crawling too, so that's working well. We have received a large corpus of monolingual data, which is fantastic. And all the dictionaries and term bases that are available. I think one thing that's quite maybe different for other languages is Irish. It can be seen as it's like a unique asset for the country, right? So anyone who's working with the Irish language is very proud of the Irish language and wants to help this cause. And so we will find there's always a positive disposition towards trying to help. So that might not be the case for other countries where it's just their language. They're not considering it as this jewel or this valuable thing. So we have been very fortunate that any electronic dictionaries that are available and have been built have been offered to us, and there's been open dialogue between every department that we have encountered so far. Now, our main issue is not really identifying the sources, it's dealing with what I've highlighted here. There's a lack of data management, good data management within these departments. Haphazard approach to translations. Not everybody uses translation memory. Most people don't retain the translation memories. We are often given PDFs or scanned PDFs and so on. So that's our main issue, is getting the quality of the data that we want. It's not so much getting people on board with the ELRC. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I can't give you a figure. I wouldn't want to promise figures, yeah.